You see, we're told to marry for love, and that sounds like a splendid idea. But pause for a moment. Why exactly do we want to marry? Is it really love, or is it a promise we were taught to keep? A fear of being alone? A plan that needs a second half to feel complete? Most don't examine that. They simply follow the path like a ritual with no memory of its origin. And so they fall, not in love, but into a dream. Not of the other, but of a life script they've been rehearsing since childhood. Then comes the vow, forever, as if one could trap a flowing river in a jar, as if the feeling would obey the form. And here is the quiet contradiction. When the feeling changes, as it surely will, people do not question the story. They question the partner. They say, "You've changed." Of course, we all do. The suffering begins when we forget. Love is not the same as the contract. The contract is a structure, but love is wild, spontaneous, impermanent by nature. To marry without knowing the difference is to build a house of glass and call it a fortress. But that's the beautiful lie, isn't it? We want certainty, even if it means lying to ourselves in the name of forever. Let's sit with this troubling question. What is it we're really seeking in marriage? Is that a feeling that refuses to fade? A person who never changes? A shield against the changing winds of life? But you see, life doesn't deal in guarantees. It deals in waves. And love, like all things alive, it moves. Now, if by sheer grace two people grow in the same direction, their changes rhythmically align, then how wonderful, how harmonious. But more often, we grow like trees in a forest, twisting, bending, reaching in different directions, each according to the pull of their own sun. And so, the first illusion shatters. Forever was never in your hands. Now, faced with this flow of change, what do people do? They resist. They tighten their grip. They try to bind what is by nature unbindable. You see, control is fear disguised as love. We try to shape the other, their actions, their affections, as if love were a statue to be sculpted, not a wind that dances through the leaves. But love, in its truest sense, is not something you do. It is something you are with, and it dies the moment it is measured, weighed, or traded. That's like asking a river not to flow. It's a subtle kind of violence, a demand for stillness in a moving universe. The more you attempt to control love, the less love remains. Relationships become battlegrounds of subtle war, endless negotiations, psychological coercion, guilt as currency, silence as punishment, all in an effort to stop the other from becoming who they are. And when they can no longer breathe inside the cage of your affection, they leave, or worse, they stay and die slowly. And people say, "They betrayed me." But who betrayed whom? Was it betrayal? Or was it simply the unbearable truth that no one belongs to you? The pain, the heartbreak, the feeling of being used, all arise when we treat love like a transaction. If you love me, you must do this. If you don't, it means you never did. But this is not love. This is emotional capitalism. Love is not a currency. It is a presence. It is being with another in the ever-shifting mystery of life, without needing to cage it in expectation. So let me be clear. I do not say you never had love. I say the ego, in its grasping and fear, strangled it slowly. The problem is not love. The problem is that we try to make it stay by chaining it to behavior, identity, and time. But the moment you try to own it, you no longer know it. And that, you see, is the quiet reason why love so often turns into suffering. Not because love failed, but because they tried to force what was only ever meant to be free. You mustn't confuse the idea of love with the institution of marriage. They are entirely different things. Now here is where many go terribly astray. They confuse love, which is spontaneous, breathing, and unpredictable, with marriage, which is an agreement, structure, a social and legal framework. To love is to swim in the ocean. To marry is to build a boat. And the tragedy is that people leap into marriage believing it is still the ocean. But no, it is a container, not meant to feel, but to carry what feeling leaves behind. You see, marriage is a business deal. And I don't say that cynically. I say it plainly. It's a contract, whether written on paper or whispered in trembling vows. Here is what I agree to do. Here is what I expect in return. Here is how we'll live. Raise children, divide property, carry on. And there's nothing wrong with that, if you know what you're doing. The trouble begins when people cloak a contract in poetry. They say, I marry you because I love you, as if love were a permanent possession. But love is not something you have, it is something you be. And if left to its own wild nature, it changes, flows, dies, and returns again in different forms. So when that first wave of passion softens, people panic. They say, but we're married. How can I not feel what I once did? And this is the root of suffering. They forgot what marriage actually is. Now someone will say, but look at those couples who love each other until the end of their lives. Isn't that proof that real love never dies? And I say yes, but not because they forced it to stay. They didn't preserve love by holding on tighter, but by letting each other be. They allowed love to change its shape and welcomed each new form, sometimes warm and passionate, sometimes distant and quiet, but never owned. They didn't demand love, they kept offering it. And so, if you want to marry for love, you must let love remain free, not as something owed to you, but as something gifted by grace. Just be honest with yourself and others. If you marry for security, say so. If you marry to raise children, say so. If you marry because of tradition, expectation, or loneliness, admit it. Just don't pretend it's all about eternal romance, because that fantasy will poison you when reality sets in. Here's what most people miss. When marriage is understood as a conscious contract and not confused with emotional magic, then you are free to treat love as what it truly is, a presence, not a promise. If love is there, it's a blessing. If it fades, it's not betrayal, it's change. But if you mix the two, when you use the contract to demand the feeling, or use the feeling to escape the contract, you create resentment. You turn something sacred into a trap. So again, I ask, why do you want to marry? If you see clearly that you're saying yes to a path, not just a feeling, then perhaps you'll walk it with presence, not illusion, because love is easy. Marriage is hard, unless love remains on the table, freely, joyfully, without coercion. And that, paradoxically, is the only kind of love that survives. Why is it so hard to admit that everything about us changes? Our thoughts, our feelings, our bodies, even what we once believed was certain. And yet, we enter marriage as if change is the one thing that shouldn't happen. We cling to a picture frozen in time. Two lovers smiling under a perfect sky, making promises with trembling hearts. I will always love you. I will never leave. But time, being what it is, laughs gently at such promises, because you will change, and your partner will too. And so we fight, resist, manipulate. We guilt, shame, seduce, and punish, all in the name of love. But what we're really doing is trying to control the uncontrollable. Now, don't mistake this for selfishness. This is not a call to abandon your family at the first sign of change. No, it is a call to conscious responsibility. You see, when you marry, especially with children involved, what you enter not just a romance, but a life contract. And contracts come with consequences. You don't get to drift away silently or disappear in the name of finding yourself, leaving your partner drowning in confusion, or your children aching for stability. So what is the answer? Perhaps it begins with honesty, deep presence, and a clear-eyed awareness. Before you marry, ask the question no one dares ask. What happens if this doesn't work? Not as a curse on the future, but as a mindful act of readiness. Not, how do I stay no matter what? But, how do I stay true while still honoring life's movement? Because to stay in a dead marriage, out of guilt, fear, or appearances, is to slowly destroy everyone involved. Not just you, but your partner, your children, your future. And to leave without clarity is to abandon your responsibility. So we need a new kind of maturity, one that can love deeply and also let go wisely. To say, I will walk with you as far as truth allows. And if the path parts, I will part with love, not war. I will care for what we've built, even if we can no longer build together. That is not romantic. That is not sentimental. That is real love. A love that doesn't trap. A love that doesn't collapse into control or cowardice. So stay, if you can stay freely, and go, if your going is honest, and your responsibility remains intact. Because the goal is not to preserve the picture, but to protect the people inside it. And sometimes that means breaking the frame. To understand what is, you must let go of what should be. Before you say, I do, ask yourself, who is speaking? Is it the soul still open and clear? Or is it the voice of fear, tradition, loneliness, or the longing for a story to save you? You see, most people do not marry a person. They marry an idea, an illusion spun from childhood tales, inherited beliefs, and the dreams of those who came before. They imagine security, status, belonging, and call it love. But marriage is not salvation. It is not therapy. It is not a fairy tale sealed with a kiss. It is a daily dance with uncertainty, a shared practice of choosing not just once at the altar, but again and again through seasons of chaos, silence, growth, and decay. So before you walk in, sit quietly and ask, am I marrying because I'm whole, or because I'm afraid to be alone? Am I entering with clarity, or with hope as a disguise? Am I prepared to grow beside this person, even if they grow in ways I cannot predict? Because love is free, and marriage is not. Marriage is a container, an agreement, and like any agreement, it must be entered with eyes wide open, not just to what you want, but to what may come. The storms, the doubts, the change, the parting even. And so, to marry wisely is not to say, I will never leave. It is to say, I vow to stay awake, to love you as you are, not as I imagine, to hold this bond with both hands open, and if the time comes, to end it with grace, not destruction. Because true responsibility is not staying together at all costs. It is knowing the cost to yourself, to them, to your children. When you stay for the wrong reasons, you owe it to yourself and to the lives you touch to ask the deeper question before you make the promise. What does it truly mean to love someone well, even when the story changes? Not everyone will understand this, but if you do, you won't suffer as others do, grasping at fading feelings, mistaking fantasy for forever. You won't marry to escape loneliness or to freeze a perfect moment in time. You'll marry with eyes open, from presence, from clarity, from truth. And that is the only vow that doesn't break.